Part 4. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 31. There was a slight commotion among the soldiers. Temple. In the temple of the god of war next door, everyone from the bishop to the priests are sitting here, and it is impossible to suddenly change people. The god of nature has no temple at all. Besides, the worshippers of the god of nature are all good people, not so arrogant. Then, the only person who comes to arrest people is Temple of the Spring Goddess. Gee, the most annoying one. They have the biggest arrogance and ask for the most donations. When asking them to help with treatment, they will resist all obstacles. All they can see in their eyes are those noble gentlemen. Alas, no matter how annoying I am, I can't show anyone's face. On the battlefield, you are waiting for others to save your life. If you are offended at this time, you may lose your life if you are unlucky. The 100 soldiers collectively turned their heads and looked back together. Captain Cullen and Knight Flynn looked at Gretel worriedly, but saw that he was standing firmly on the podium without looking nervous at all. Gretel was indeed relieved. He had rushed quickly enough before and was not too far behind the temple troops. He returned to the city guard before the Roman knights finished their complaint and the temple decided to arrest them. With good luck, he saved Knight Shiro by chance, and thus gained the attention of the god of war temple. What was even more beneficial to him was that when the temple of the goddess of spring came to arrest someone, the city guards and the bosses of the temple of the god of war were both present. With these two people here, they wouldn't see him suffer in vain, right? Greet walked off the podium calmly. Before Flynn Knight and Captain Nolan spoke, he faced the temple messenger and said calmly, "You're looking for Gretel Nordmark?" "That's me." His expression was so calm that the visitor was stunned and looked at him carefully. A teenage boy with black hair and eyes. Wearing a dark brown burlap waistcoat, dusty, he looked like the lowest level soldier in the city guard. From his appearance to his attire, it was exactly the same as the description of the Roman knight. Although it is a bit strange to stand on the podium, but, well, a soldier is a soldier no matter what. Very good. He raised the wooden stick in his hand and waved it vigorously. Behind him, two tall and sturdy guards immediately stepped forward. "Come with us." Gretel did not obey or resist. He stood there and looked at the captain, Knight Nolan, with questioning eyes. As expected, Knight Nolan stood up with his sword in hand, frowned slightly, and asked the person, "Gretel? Why does the temple want him?" "Just asking a few questions," the visitor said lightly and perfunctorily. After answering, he immediately stared at Gretel and urged again, "Let's go." Wait, I'm not done yet, can you wait a little while?" "The priest is waiting." "Let's go." Greet hesitated to step forward. Taking this opportunity, Captain Flynn squeezed over and reported the previous events to Knight Nolan very quietly and quickly. How the team was recruited, how the Roman knights avenged their personal revenge, how they were seriously injured, and how Gretel gained the favor of the necromancer. Knight Nolan pondered while listening. "Listen to the whole story and nod." "I understand." "Greet, let's go, I'll accompany you there." "Lord Knight." The temple messenger blurted out and wanted to stop him. Knight Nolan did not allow him to argue and waved his hand. "Little Greet is my subordinate, and I have always been very optimistic about him. Since the temple is calling for someone, it is only natural that I accompany him. This. I thought I was summoning a soldier, but instead I provoked the captain of the city guard, and the 7th level knight took action myself." The envoy was quite surprised. Before he could refuse, the bald bishop of the god of war temple stood up with a smile and walked to Gretel. "This kid is interesting. What does the spring goddess temple want to ask him? I also want to take a look." "Your temple won't welcome him, right? It's not up to him, an errand boy, to decide whether you're welcome or not. Besides, the bishop of the temple of the god of war paid a visit to the temple of the goddess of spring, and even the high priest could only go out to greet him. What could he say? What else do you dare to say? The messenger bowed with a grimace and extended his hand to guide. The bald bishop walked out of his seat with a smile. When he passed by Greet, he stretched out his arm and hugged his neck hard. The bishop was a tall man, with broad shoulders and a round waist, and his arms were almost as thick as Gretel's waist. With just such a hug and pressure, Gretel almost couldn't hold his breath. A group of people rumbled out of the military camp. The temple of the spring goddess is located behind the city lord's palace, far or near from the city guard barracks. It's a bit far to walk there, but if you really want to go there on horseback or by car, it feels a bit too invasive. The bald bishop took long strides and walked straight forward. Those from the temple of the spring goddess originally came on horseback, so they had no choice but to hold the reins and walk behind. Damn it, why is this guy so shameless? The messenger complained bitterly in his heart. Helplessly, the whole city knows the style of the bald bishop. He is fond of fighting, loves to fight, and likes to arm wrestle with others in hotels. Once, he defeated a 5th-level knight after agreeing to use only physical strength. Now that the old man wants to walk, what can we do? Let's all follow him. The messenger walked away full of complaints. As he was walking, a figure suddenly ran past behind him. It was one of the temple guards he had brought to support the scene. He walked up to Knight Nolan in 2 or 3 steps, followed suit, and reported in a low voice. It's the Roman knight's complaint at the temple. The messenger was stunned. He looked to the left, and 2 of the 4 squadron captains of the city guard came over, one on the left and the other on the right, sandwiching Greet in the middle, glaring at him from time to time. Looking to the right, behind the bald bishop, 7 or 8 priests were following closely, as if they were rushing out. Just looking at the comparison of numbers, the person he wanted to arrest looked less like a city guard soldier and more like a priest from the temple of the god of war. Looking behind again, there was a long line of city guard soldiers following them, their heads and necks raised, as if they were worried. The messenger's head suddenly became clear. I'm just an errand boy. The city guards, and the young man I want to arrest have no grudges. I didn't get the benefits of Roman knight either. So what if I just sell something better? He hurried forward, past Gretel, and whispered to Knight Nolan. The Roman knights accused Gretel of your city guard of colluding with the necromancer and seriously injuring him. Priest Donald testified for Gretel, saying that before the necromancer appeared, Gretel had already entered the hall below and was together knocked down. Now that the search has been unfavorable and caused significant damage, Priest Donald has been asked to reflect. The Roman knight was seriously injured, and the high priest personally cast healing spells, but the effect was not satisfactory. Now he is quite tolerant of him. The high priest said that the reason why the knight's injury is difficult to recover is because he was delayed all night last night and did not receive timely treatment. Behind Knight Nolan, Gretel's eyes flashed slightly, and the corners of his mouth raised silently. Disobey doctor's advice? Should. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 32. Chapter 32 I am Gretel backed by a big boss Nordmark. The Roman knight was irritated. Irritated and frightened. Last night, after the young city guard was invited in by the necromancer, he discovered that there was something wrong with his hand. The right thumb cannot be straightened or bent normally. It doesn't matter if he can't straighten, but if he can't bend hard, it means a devastating blow to him. He can't hold the sword anymore. The Roman knight clenched his right hand again and again, and let go again and again. He originally had a glimmer of hope. After regaining his freedom this morning, Priest Donald treated him immediately. Useless. It's of no use at all. The holy white light fell again and again. The blood rushes, and the warm power flows from the arm to the wrist. When the hand is tightened, the thumb of the right hand still cannot use any force at all. When he was most frightened, the Roman knight remembered the boy who blurted out to stop him before pouring the healing potion. "You can't treat your wound like this, it's not enough to just treat the outside, you have to fix the inside first." Why did he say that? What does he know? Did he do it on purpose? It's all the fault of that untouchable. It's all him. The Roman knight roared lowly. He turned to the trainee knight standing beside him, his eyes were so red that they were bleeding. "Have they been arrested yet?" "No, I don't know." "Don't go and see it yet." The apprentice knight ran away. This is his first trip. How many times has he made since the temple sent people out to now? Isn't he just a soldier? If the temple arrests people, why can't they be arrested? I sent him out to see him again and again, and his legs were so thin that he... The young trainee knight leaned close to the side door and poked his head. There was no one. Halfway back, a familiar guard saw him sweating profusely and grabbed him. "Still asking about this? They're coming from the main entrance." Ah! The boy was stupid. When arresting people in the temple, especially civilians who have no backstage, there is never any reason to go through the main entrance. Pull it in through the side door and throw it into the dungeon. When you will see the light of day again depends on whether your family redeems you quickly or when the big boss will think of you. But this time, Gretel was accompanied by the captain of the city guard and the bishop of the god of war temple. Let these two go through the side door? The messenger from the temple said that he had not lived enough and did not want to die like this. Besides, it's not his turn to make the decision. The bald bishop strode forward, and Knight Nolan followed without hesitation. Greed walked leisurely behind these two people, feeling like the fox in the fox pretending to be a tiger. Phew, he should be the resident doctor who follows the chief director on ward rounds. The temple of the goddess of spring is not large in scale. Compared with the temple of the god of war and the empty main church of glory, it can only be regarded as a small one. It was early summer, and the outer walls of the temple were covered with vines, covering the entire temple in greenery, making it look more delicate and quiet. At the main entrance of the temple, in a small square, stands a pure white stone sculpture. A graceful woman holds a stone vase with both hands, standing in a pool of spring water, with clear springs constantly gushing out of the bottle mouth. A pool of white stone was built around the stone sculpture, and civilians continued to come to worship the statue. Then, they scooped a bowl of water from the pool and carefully carried it back. Is this an artificial fountain? What is it driven by, a water tower, a water pump, or a magic circle? It's not really a blessing, is it? Gretel watched curiously. Even if it really uses a water tower and pump, it's still pretty good. At least it can provide unlimited water supply. I just don't know if this water has been coagulated, filtered, filtered, and disinfected. Tisk, I guess they don't have bleaching powder. I guess it's okay to shine it with holy light. After all, in this hellish place, even the streets are covered with dirt on sunny days and mud on rainy days. There are no sewers at all, and the quality of daily drinking water is very questionable. If there is an outbreak of cholera or something, it only takes a matter of minutes for people to die in blockbusters. As a former emergency department surgeon, just thinking about it makes Greet go crazy for his emergency medicine colleagues. That was the end of his random thoughts. Two lines of guards hurried out from the door of the temple, one on the left and one on the left, standing in formation. Immediately afterwards, the priests of the spring goddess filed out. Gretel's eyes lit up. The leader wears a silver crown, a light blue silk robe, and two daffodils on his belt embroidered with silver thread, showing his identity as a 7th-level priest. There was a pair of round-framed glasses on the bridge of his nose, shining brightly under the firelight. Glasses. Glasses. The craftsmanship of this era can already make glasses. If you have glasses, you have lenses, and if you have lenses, you have the basis for medical observation. Microscope, here I come. E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, antibiotics, here I come. He was staring at people, but no one was staring at him. The great priest of the spring goddess hurriedly walked down the steps, took 2 hurried steps, and stood calmly. He raised his hands in a prayer gesture and smiled at the bishop of war who was 10 steps away. May the goddess of springs bless you. Stepping out to greet someone, stepping down the steps, standing still, and saluting are all a series of smooth and fluid movements that are both enthusiastic and elegant. This process has obviously been refined over time, and every detail is flawless. In Greet's view, it is exactly the same as when their dean received an inspection from his superiors. May the god of war bless you. The bald bishop returned the greeting with a smile. After the 2 priests greeted each other, the priest turned his eyes and looked at Knight Nolan beside him. Gretel clearly saw his eyes passing over her, and also glanced at the temple messenger and 2 guards who came to catch her, but the other party just looked at him like he didn't know anything, smiled, and saluted again. May the goddess of springs bless you. Thank you, goddess, for your kindness. In front, on the left and right, and behind the back, the soldiers responded in unison. Greet followed their example and lowered his head. He clasped his hands and murmured in response. Pretend that you are just an ordinary soldier, inconspicuous at all. However, he failed. Half of the team were war priests, all wearing robes. From Captain Nolan on down, although the knights did not wear robes, the exquisiteness of their armor was not on the same level as Gretel's. Even if the guards of the Spring Goddess Temple go out to arrest people, they must at least wear a decent uniform and maintain their dignity outside. At first glance, he is the guy wearing a burlap waistcoat and knee-length shorts, and his style is the most distinctive. Not only that, after entering the temple, the captain, Knight Nolan, pulled him over and pushed him in front of the high priest. This child is a newcomer to our city guard. He has recently awakened to the healing arts, and I am very optimistic about him. I heard that the Gishan temple summoned him to ask a few questions, so I will accompany him to listen. You will not be unwelcome. Bar. Gretel, I'm not a child. The ranking dropped to 25th on the new light novel list. Yesterday, there were only 98 recommendation votes, falling below 100 for the first time. Don't you all love me anymore? Woohoo! Please collect, recommend, invest, book reviews. There has been less and less feedback recently, it's almost like I'm on a standalone. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 33. If the city guards hadn't come forward, Gretel's treatment would most likely be that he would be thrown into the dungeon and given a set meal of stir-fried pork with bamboo shoots or some other set meal. As for when he can see the light of day again, it depends on whether Captain Cullen can do anything, and when he can persuade the city guards to come forward to fish for people. If there was no god of war temple to come forward, Greet's treatment would most likely be thrown into a side hall, where a priest would come out and cross-examine him. If you're lucky, you can get the Roman knight to confront him. According to convention, at the same level, spellcasters have a higher status than warriors. The high priests of the Temple of the Goddess of Spring are on an equal footing with the City Lord of Heartland City, and the city guards are just subordinates of the City Lord's palace. Even though Captain Nolan is a 7th level knight and has the same level as the high priest, he is indeed one step below him. But now, the bald bishop walked beside the high priest with a smile. Regardless of their level or combat prowess, the hosts of 2 different temples have nominally equal status. The bald bishop said he wanted to watch, but the high priest could only lead them to the main hall and arrange their seats while holding their noses. The high priest stood high on the pulpit, and several low-ranking priests separated themselves and stood in a row behind him. Knight Nolan sat down on the right side of the main hall. The bald bishop repeatedly refused and only sat in the auditorium where the believers were listening. As for Greet's own position, he looked left and right. Oh ho, the dock. And it is the dock of criminal proceedings. Are you so disrespectful? Can he ask for a defense attorney? Unfortunately, there is no lawyer. Nolan Knight took the position of defender, and his deterrence seems to be quite high. The level of defense is unknown. What makes Gretel even more depressed is that the Roman Knight's seat is on the left side of the temple, far opposite Captain Nolan. That's the prosecutor's seat. He sits in the prosecutor's seat. Why should I stand in the dock? I didn't commit a crime. I really didn't commit a crime. Gretel was depressed, and the Roman knight who was summoned from the side hall had fire in his eyes. Seeing Gretel standing lazily at the bottom without any fear, his whole body trembled, and he wanted to pounce on him and tear him alive and eat his flesh. You. It's you. It's you who hurt me. My hand, my hand. Greet was startled. After not seeing each other for a day, the Roman knight seemed completely out of shape. His face was ashen, his cheeks were sunken, and there was a large patch of stubble on his strong chin. Her short, energetic hair was limp and messy, falling on the top of her head. Greet glanced at it and sighed secretly. He couldn't be more familiar with this change. In hospitals in previous lives, those patients who knew they were terminally ill, those patients' families who received bad news, those who couldn't raise enough money to get themselves or their loved ones treated. One night, or even 1 or 2 hours, the whole person's energy can suddenly collapse like this. In comparison, the Roman knights are still somewhat spirited. But this spirit quickly disappeared. He looked around and saw Knight Nolan of the city guard sitting opposite, and saw the bishop of the God of War temple sitting below, and the expression on his face suddenly changed. Pain, unwillingness, disbelief, many emotions flashed through each other, and the whole person trembled slightly. After being stunned for a while, he slowly sat down, hunching his back inch by inch. Greet observed him calmly. If you look closely, you can see that the thumb of the right hand is still the same as yesterday. It can't straighten or bend very well. An experienced doctor can tell at a glance that the shape is unnatural. It seems that high-level healing potions are not omnipotent. Gretel lowered his eyes slightly. The high priest looked at the Roman knight and sighed, turned his face to the left and nodded. Behind him, a 5th-level priest stepped forward and spoke loudly. Gret Nordmark. I am. The Roman knight accused you of colluding with the necromancer and seriously injuring him. What do you have to say? Greet was surprised. He glanced steadily at the priest who asked the question, then at the Roman knight who collapsed as if his spine had been ripped out, and slowly opened his mouth. Brother, your popularity is so bad. Big bosses from several companies were there, and the priest in charge of the interrogation still asked this question. This is not because I want to die, but because I want you to die. After sighing for a moment, Gretel still stood there peacefully. He raised his eyes, looked directly at the great priest, and said loudly. I don't. Gret Nordmark. The 5th-level priest who asked questions on behalf of the high priest shouted loudly. Be honest. Knight Roman is a noble temple knight. Will he frame you? What's so great about false accusations? The front foot was cured and discharged, but the back foot complained to the doctor a lot. Greet rolled his eyes secretly and asked calmly. What did Priest Donald say? Priest Donald is facing the wall and reflecting. Don't talk about other people, talk about yourself. Gretel looked at the Roman knight and sighed. Being able to confine Priest Donald to self-reflection in advance, it seems that the Roman knights used a lot of connections in order to retaliate against him. Why bother? Why bother? People are useless, isn't it good to use this relationship to arrange the rest of their lives? Besides, you can also use your connections to get ideas. Look, your life is at stake, someone stabbed you, right? His answer was more brisk. My team and I were recruited by the temple guards during a routine patrol to join the search operation. After falling asleep last night, some temple guards discovered the skeleton soldiers. The whole team and I gathered together and broke into the castle basement. After the Roman knight killed the gargoyle, when he was about to open the inner door, the necromancer appeared and knocked down everyone present, including me, with one blow. Gretel stopped talking and spread his hands. When I went down, the necromancer hadn't come yet. When the necromancer came forward, I had already been knocked down. You say I colluded, but I have to have time to collude. He looked left and right, the great priest stroking his beard, and nodded silently. Captain Nolan smiled at him with encouragement, as if to say, "Don't be afraid, no one can frame you as for what's going on behind the scenes." He couldn't see the bald bishop's face, but he could hear his voice. His voice was still so loud, and as soon as he opened his mouth, the whole hall buzzed. I heard Little John say it after passing by. "Oh, Little John is a newly promoted priest apprentice and also participated in this search." What Greet said is exactly the same as his report this afternoon. Gretel took a long breath. "Thank you, Lord Bishop. Thank you for supporting me and proving it for me. Thanks to Little John for reporting the matter as soon as possible. With the God of War Temple coming forward, my statement has become much more credible, and I am no longer afraid of their criticism. Well, in the middle of the battlefield first aid course tonight, I will write a complete book for you later. Thanks to Etienne Huixi for the 200 starting coins. After a whole day, I finally added 2 collections, from 498 to 500, wiping away tears. I continue to ask for help, collections, investment, recommendations, book reviews, or if it doesn't work, please take a look at it as it is updated every day. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 34. The Roman knight looked defeated. When he sent people to capture Gretel, he didn't think too much, he was just a soldier. He was taken into the temple, beaten and imprisoned for a few days. What's so difficult about it? Could it be that for such a small role, the city guards came to investigate? Who knew the city guards were really here? Not only people came, but also a captain and 2 squadron leaders came. Not only people came from the city guard, but the bishop of the God of War Temple also came, and he was willing to testify for that little guy. Why? Why? The Roman knight gritted his teeth. I couldn't help but want to make a fist. When I made my fist, I realized that my thumb couldn't use force at all. Suddenly, a surge of anger emerged from his heart. He was finished anyway. Framing an innocent person, violating the knight's commandments, and being caught by the high priest in front of distinguished guests, the best ending for a knight who does such a thing is to go to the battlefield and start as a soldier, washing himself with the blood of the enemy sin. And he is already useless. He couldn't even go to the battlefield. In that case. That being the case. He was the one who hurt me. The Roman knight suddenly raised his head and stared at Gretel, his eyes as red as blood. When I was treating the injury, he wouldn't let me pour the healing potion. After he and the necromancer went in, he sent the black cat out again to try to drag me in. If it hadn't been for me holding onto the doorframe. Gretel sighed. I really miss director you of their medical department. A short and stocky man, he can get into fights, bang the table, stand up to the health commission, and survive medical troubles. Basically, he was the one who took the lead in making such unreasonable complaints, and all that fell on the doctor's head was drizzle. But now it's time to travel. He has to bear all the ups and downs outside. Gretel raised his eyes. Like any young man who is new to the world and sees the dangers of the world for the first time, he looked at the captain of the city guard with clear eyes and a slightly trembling tone. "Captain, if Roman Knight's accusations are proven, what will happen to me?" "What will happen?" "A civilian boy colluded with the enemy and seriously injured a knight." Whether it was the temple investigation or the city lord's palace investigation, it was normal for Gretel to be beaten to death on the spot. However, Gretel is obviously innocent. Nolan Knight had already felt a fire in his heart. They come to arrest people and frame them arbitrarily. Even if the person is a knight of the temple, the city guards cannot bully them casually. Not to mention, little Greet's father was once the captain of the city guard squadron, and he himself had just saved Knight Zero. Knight Nolan frowned. Just as he was about to speak, the high priest of the spring goddess temple sighed and spoke first. "Child, you don't have to worry." The high priest's voice was soft and his manner was noble. Even if the person who did the bad thing was a knight from their temple, he couldn't shake the air he put on. The clear eyes of the spring goddess can see through everything. She will never let innocent people suffer injustice. Praise the goddess of springs. Praise the goddess of spring water. The priests and knights bowed their heads and saluted together. Gretel lowered his head in a similar manner and murmured something silently, as if he had already worshipped. When he spoke again, his tone was sonorous and his words were sharp. "So, do you think someone who has wrongly accused me before accuses me again is still credible? Like a sword thrust out from under a thick cloak. Like a grazing sheep suddenly showing its fangs." Knight Nolan opened his eyes slightly, a little surprised, as if he was meeting Gretel for the first time. He immediately laughed happily. Amid the laughter, the high priest's face turned gloomy, a little ugly. The Roman knight roared sharply. "You're talking nonsense. It's you who caused it? It's you who..." "Enough." The high priest suddenly became angry. The staff in his hand paused, and a water-colored brilliance burst out from the tip of the staff, and the Roman knight was immediately silenced. The head of the high priest's staff was tilted slightly, pointing in his direction. "Take him to the ascetic chamber at the bottom of the temple. He is not allowed to come out without a breakthrough. Practice." Gretel was a little dissatisfied. But the other party has already made a decision. With his status, even protesting is of no use. Gretel looked at Knight Nolan inquiringly. Seeing the captain shaking his head slightly, he stopped saying anything and stood in silence. It seemed like he was showing respect, but he was actually distracted from studying the ground. "Tisk, this floor is so smooth. It's not marble, it's as good as terrazzo. Disinfect it well and use it as the floor of the operating room, no problem." He stayed out of the situation and stared at the floor with great amusement. The Roman knights on the other side were struggling in every possible way. However, under the confinement of the great priest's magic, a knight's force had no effect, and he was quickly defeated. The high priest then softened his expression, chatted politely with Knight Nolan, and sent them off. "Captain, where is the lowest level of the temple?" As soon as the lights in the temple disappeared, Gretel couldn't wait to ask. Knight Nolan smiled softly, stretched out his hand and knocked on his head. "Still not convinced? You kid, I've never seen a great priest be so cruel. I've only heard of that place. It's said to be lightless and silent. Even the person who delivers the food can't speak. It's a high-level place. It is used by knights to meditate and practice hard. Even if Roman is a 5th-level knight, it will take at least a year and a half to achieve a breakthrough." "Well. How?" Nolan Knight raised an eyebrow. Gretel hesitated. "Then I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the rest of his life." "What?" Knight Nolan was shocked. "I looked at something wrong with him, especially with his right hand." He turned to the bald bishop. "Can't it be cured?" Under the knight, the bald bishop looked solemn. He frowned and recalled for a while, shook his head, and nodded again. I haven't looked at it carefully, so I can't draw a conclusion. However, the old guy's healing skills are similar to mine. If he can't cure it himself, I probably can't do it either. Well, no matter how high level the divine grace is, for example, our archbishop can do it, maybe. However, whether an archbishop with a priest level of 11 or above would take action for a level 5 knight is another question. Greet looked left and right, his mind spinning rapidly. High-level magic may have the effect of replanting severed limbs or regenerating limbs, so he had to remember it well. If you have a chance, study the principles. He silently set a long-term goal for himself. Knight Nolan was silent for a while, pulled Grey to his side, and warned cautiously. If Roman is really dead, the temple will not keep him locked up forever. In a few months, or if his family begs for mercy, he might be released. This guy is very small-minded. Maybe he will be released after he is released. If I want to take revenge on you, is the place where you live safe? To be on the safe side, should you live in a military camp? Under the moonlight, Greet raised his head slightly and smiled. How many months? I only need a few months. I will become a mage apprentice as soon as possible, don't worry. Thanks to @book friend 20190717091436136136, @stealing clothes. 100 starting coins for the reward. Keep asking for collections, recommendations, book reviews, and all kinds of things. Yesterday, I only added 5 collections in one day. If I can't move up the ranking list, I can't move up the collection list. It's too difficult for me. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 35. It was already late at night when we came out of the Spring Goddess Temple. The group gradually dispersed and went back to their homes. Knight Nolan made a special detour to send Gretel to a junction not far from his home, and then parted ways with him. Gretel was walking alone on the side street. Looking left and right, the houses on both sides were dark, without any lights. The owners must have fallen asleep. Occasionally, the dogs barked, but there was no sound, and they sounded half asleep and half awake. Greet compared his memories in this darkness and tried to identify his house. Unfortunately, the surroundings were too dark, and the houses all looked the same, low and cramped, and you could reach out and touch the eaves. Looking around for a long time, he still didn't see a house that looked like his own. He couldn't help but secretly become impatient. How reliable is the memory of my predecessor? To make matters worse, his stomach growled loudly at this moment. Gretel. It's not like I haven't eaten dinner yet, but at this point, it's obvious that I've already consumed all of it. Where could he find something to eat in the middle of the night? Did you save dry food before going out on patrol? Even if I save it, can I still eat the brown bread after 2 or 3 days? Maybe he should stay in the barracks tonight? Is it too late for him to go back and knock on the door now? Greet's mind was filled with all kinds of thoughts, and when he turned a corner, his eyes suddenly became bright. 20 or 30 steps away, a warm light shone through a window. Although it was not bright, it was eye-catching enough in the dark night. Gretel instinctively walked towards the house. After taking a few steps, the door creaked open, and a thin woman, guarding an oil lamp, went out carefully. He raised his head and saw Gretel standing not far away, beaming with joy and waving to him vigorously. Little Gretel. You're back. Have you had dinner? Karen. Edward. Little Greet is back. With a crash, a group of people, led by Uncle Karen, rushed out of the house. Gretel was stunned. I don't know why, but I feel sour and my eye circles are already red. In his previous life, his parents had divorced when he was very young. His mother worked hard to bring him up by selling hot dry noodles in the morning and porridge at night. Studying medicine and practicing medicine, Every final semester during school was like a college entrance examination. After work, I worked overtime continuously. There was never enough time to spend with my mother. I finally got promoted to deputy director, so I can relax a little bit, but I want to support my son, but I don't want to be kissed. From then on, among all the lights in the house, there was no one left for him. Until today. And Eileen? He murmured. The woman had already rushed over and grabbed him, looking left and right. Little Greet, you're back. Are you okay? I knew that wasn't a good thing. It's all thanks to you this time. Your Uncle Karen told me. Fortunately, you saved him. As he spoke, he dragged him towards the house. Gretel followed her obediently, was dragged into the house and pressed down in front of the table. With a bang, a bowl full of broth was placed in front of you. Half of the meat bones came out of the soup bowl, and the aroma was overflowing, making your mouth water. And Eileen, I've had dinner. Gretel tried to decline. Before he finished speaking, his stomach made another gurgling sound. He turned red with embarrassment on the spot. And Eileen laughed and ruffled his hair hard. Why are you being polite to your aunt? I have eaten so many meals with my aunt since I was a child, and I have never seen you embarrassed. Besides, you saved your Uncle Karen's life. If you are polite to your aunt, will your aunt have to pay? Will I pay you for the treatment? While talking, he was busy around the room. After scrubbing, I cut a few slices of bread, then untied the bacon strips hanging from the roof, and sliced 2 slices of bacon. He pinched it with bread and placed it neatly on Greet's right side. A half-grown boy is lucky to be able to eat. Eat? Gretel smiled. He no longer refused, holding bread in one hand and broth in the other, munching with his head down. And Eileen watched him eating with a smile, turned around, and hit her sons again like chickens. Go, go, go. What are you looking at? Go to sleep. Children won't grow if they don't sleep. Uncle Cullen's 2 sons are both younger than Gretel, Edward is 13 and David is 10. The 2 teenagers looked at Greet eagerly, trying to share a bite of the food, but they did not struggle with their mother, and she took one with each hand and threw it into the bedroom. Greet was also a little embarrassed. Just when he was about to speak, he felt his clothes being pulled. Brother Gretel. Greet turned around. Standing next to her was a little girl of 5 or 6 years old, thinly dressed and thin. Under the light, she looked up at Gretel, timidly, her face a little pale, and she reached out and raised something to his mouth. Brother, eat. Greet searched the memory of the original person and remembered that this was Uncle Karen's youngest daughter Avril, who was 6.5 years old this year. Greet picked her up distressedly and let her sit on the stool next to her. Sister Avril, why did you run down here? It's cold at night. As he spoke, he held her raised arm and pressed it down gently. The little girl squirmed and refused. Brother, eat it. Brother doesn't eat, you eat dash. Brother saved Dad. Brother eat. Avril Lavigne insisted on raising her arms. Greet hid here and there, but was always defeated by the little girl's insistence. In the memory, the girl's body bones had always been weak, and her face would turn pale if she exercised even slightly. Gretel did not dare to let Avril work too hard. He turned around helplessly and complained to Aunt Eileen. Auntie, really, why would you tell Avril about this kind of thing? Of course I have to tell her. And Eileen smiled and stood aside, even raising her chin to signal Gretel that there was no need to refuse. Greet had no choice but to open her mouth and let Avril stuff the piece of stuff into her mouth. When the tip of the tongue touches it, the faint sweetness spreads, and it turns out to be a piece of maltose. Candies that were not worth mentioning in the previous life are a rare source of sweetness for children in this world. Once you get a piece, you often have to treasure it for a month or 2. Thank you. Gretel gently touched Avril's hair. The little girl smiled back, then suddenly burst out into a coughing fit. She pressed her hand on her chest and her little face turned red. Gretel hesitated for a moment, then reached out to pat her back. After patting her, his eyes dropped, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. It was early summer, the weather had begun to get warmer, and the little girl ran out wearing slippers. The small toes were exposed outside the shoes, and the nails on the toes, which should have been light pink, looked a little dark under the light. Cyanosis. The alarm in Greet's heart rang loudly. He rubbed his eyes, not believing it, for fear that he had seen it wrong. He reached out and moved the oil lamp to the table, letting the light shine directly on the little girl's feet, and took a closer look. That's right, Avril Lavigne's toenails are indeed a little purple and cyanotic. Cyanosis indeed. And Eileen had also rushed over at this time. And Eileen had already rushed over, holding her daughter in her arms and gently patting her back. While filming, I answered Greet's questions. It's okay. Avril just doesn't like to move. She is weak and prone to coughing when the seasons change. Gretel was stunned. Fragments of memories appeared bit by bit. Avril has been in poor health since she was a child. She gets tired easily. She likes to cough every time the seasons change. She is smaller than her peers. After a while, Avril's coughing stopped, and the flush on her face gradually receded. Greet took the opportunity to observe carefully and saw that her lips were pink and slightly white, but there was no sign of cyanosis. He raised his little hand again and saw that the fingernails were also pink. The lower body is heavier than the upper body. Dissociative cyanosis. Greet's heart couldn't stop sinking. All the signs together pointed to a disease that he didn't want to doubt, but had to consider. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be. Gretel tried her best to comfort herself and forced a smile, and Eileen, you know, I have recently become a healer. Sister Avril has a bad cough. Can you give me a tube and let me listen to her breathing sounds? Thanks to a cherry. Gray for the 100 starting coins. Today, the ranking briefly reached the top 20 of the new light novel list, appearing on the first page, although it has fallen down again now, and the collection has increased by 14 spots, much better than yesterday when there were only 5. Thank you to everyone who voted monthly, voted for recommendations, left book reviews, and gave rewards. Continue asking for collections, asking for monthly tickets, asking for recommendation votes, asking for book reviews, asking for all kinds of. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 36. Tube. And Eileen was confused. Greet stretched out his hand to show the length of his forearm, then circled his left thumb and index finger together to compare the thickness. It's so thick, so long, it needs to be hollow. Just listen, and Eileen waved her hand proudly, Avril is so young. Besides, you watched her grow up. This, Gretel sweated profusely. He never wants to listen to heart sounds next to someone's chest again. If possible, never want it again. Seeing his persistence, and Eileen searched under the kitchen and found a jet black hollow pipe, washed it and handed it over. Greet took it in his hand and looked at it. This thing was longer than his entire arm. One end was covered with black carbon and there were many burn marks. It was clearly a blowtorch. All right. Let's just make do with it for now, and if I have the chance later, I'll build a stethoscope. Gretel calmed down, pointed one end of the torch at his ear, and put the other end against Avril's body. It was said that he was listening to the breathing sounds, but the end of the fire blower was slowly moving until it reached the strongest point of the heart's apex pulsation. Stick firmly, listen with bated breath, move from time to time, the more you listen, the more serious your face becomes. There is a murmur in the apical region. Moving to the left edge of the sternum and the pulmonary valve area of the second intercostal space, the diastolic murmur becomes clearer and is clearly a continuous mechanical murmur. Moving toward the aortic valve area, the murmur gradually weakens. The murmur in the tricuspid valve area was almost inaudible. After listening once around the heart, it moved to the left subclavicle, and a clear mechanical-like murmur sounded again. A continuous mechanical murmur can be heard during diastole in the second intercostal space on the left edge of the sternum and below the left clavicle. The conduction range is wide. Combined with the previous dissociative cyanosis, weakness, fatigue, and seasonal cough, it is highly suspected. Patent ductus arteriosus. One of the types of congenital heart disease. In mild cases, there will be no major symptoms throughout life, while in severe cases, it can cause pulmonary hypertension, heart failure, and even death. Greet closed her eyes hard. He patiently listened to his lungs to make sure there were no abnormalities in his breath sounds, and then put down the fire blower. After thinking about it, with a glimmer of hope, I turned around and asked Aunt Eileen. "Aunt, Sister Avril's body, have you seen the pastor?" "What did the pastor say?" His serious look clearly frightened others. Under the oil lamp, Aunt Eileen was stunned, forced a smile and sent Avril to sleep, and then let out a long sigh. "The bishop said that Avril is just weak. She should rest more and be careful not to catch a cold. If she wants to be cured to the same level as ordinary people, she will need a very high level of magic, which he can't use." "Do they just think they are weak?" Greet was a little sad, but also a little relieved. "It doesn't matter if you only know these words. Sometimes, ignorance is also a kind of happiness. What can you do if you know that you have a congenital heart disease? Heart disease has been a terminal illness for a long time. Heart surgery, and for a long time after surgery began to develop, was off limits to medicine. Theodor Bierroth, an Austrian doctor who was revered as the father of surgery by later generations, cast such a curse on heart surgery. Performing surgery on the heart is a blasphemy to the art of surgery. Anyone who attempts to perform heart surgery will end up in ruins. Note 1. There is no life support, no extracorporeal circulation device, or even the most basic hemostasis, disinfection, and anesthesia. Under current conditions, rash heart surgery is tantamount to murdering the patient. Rather than doing this, it would be better to let Uncle Karen, Aunt Eileen, and the others live their lives in ignorance. Gretel reluctantly convinced herself and turned her attention to Avril again. After the coughing stopped, the little girl's expression softened a lot on the toes. The faint purple color has also faded and turned pink again. In Greet's eyes, this light pink was simply the most beautiful color in the world. Thank God. Cyanosis only occurs when there is severe coughing or hypoxia, but there is no cyanosis at ordinary times. This level of patent ductus arteriosus can develop into pulmonary hypertension, severe heart failure, and even death. With luck, there is still more than 10 years left. Greet breathed a sigh of relief. He tried hard to suppress his uneasiness, comforted little Avril with a smile, chatted a few words with Uncle Karen and Aunt Eileen, and left. The door closed behind him, and the moment it faded into darkness, Gretel closed his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. Patent ductus arteriosus is treatable. In his previous life, he had seen countless such patients with his own eyes, and had also referred such patients to his colleagues in the Department of Cardiology. This disease is not considered terminal, and even its treatment does not cost a fortune. A child like little Avril, in a previous life, would only need an interventional surgery. The catheter between the aorta and pulmonary artery is blocked with an occluder, and the entire operation only takes an hour and a half. You can hear your heart sounds return to normal within the same day, and within a few days, you can be active. But the operation is not easy. It is necessary to have an electrocardiogram to determine whether the heart is defective, an X-ray examination to rule out other diseases, an echocardiogram to identify the disease, a cardiac catheterization examination to understand the pulmonary vascular resistance and shunt conditions, to rule out other malformations, and to confirm whether the patient is eligible for surgery. A guide wire with a maximum diameter of 0.88 mm and a minimum diameter of 0.45 mm is required. Under the guidance of X-rays, it must be guided all the way upstream along the patient's femoral artery until it is inserted into the heart. It is necessary to have an occluder made of super-elastic nickel titanium alloy, with a polymer biofilm inside, which is sent to the defect of the arterial catheter by a guide wire, and then the occluder is controlled to open and block the gap. Of course, there must be a contrast agent that is of high purity and will not cause thrombosis when injected into the blood vessels, and the blood flow direction can be displayed under X-rays to confirm whether the operation is successful. Each piece by piece, is the crystallization of modern medicine, modern industry, and top-notch high technology. From the Industrial Revolution to the Electric Age and the Internet Age, countless years of development in technology, industry, and medicine have filled the gaps in life and turned once incurable diseases into commonplace. But now, Gretel Nordmark, has nothing. This is another world. There is no catheter guide wire occluder, no echocardiographic X-ray, no anesthesia, no blood transfusion, no imaging. How can we snatch little Avril Lavigne's life back from the hands of death? Divine magic is no longer reliable. The bishop said that there was no way to treat it. Obviously, lower-level magic could not deal with congenital diseases. Magic. Can magic emit ultrasound? Can magic create an electrocardiogram? Can magic summon a thin enough guide wire to enter the human heart and treat the defect? Can magic allow him to see the mysteries inside the human body? Gretel doesn't know. But he knows that starting from tomorrow, he will open the door to magic. As long as he works hard enough and has enough imagination, everything is possible. 10 years, he will do all this within 10 years. Uncle Karen, Aunt Eileen, Sister Avril. Wait for me. Note 1. Quoted from Legends Outside the Heart. Thanks to at Yamengbing and at Mitra for the 100 starting coins. Thank you at for this many years. The reward is 100 Q coins. Woo woo woo, can you give me the starting point coins next time? You spend the same money, but my income from Q coins will be cut in half, and I can't rank yet. Yesterday, 18 collections were added. 43 people cast a total of 180 recommendation votes. Wow, you guys are so nice. Keep asking for collections, recommendations, book reviews, whatever you want, I ask for anything. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 37. Gretel's own home is actually near Uncle Karen's house. After returning home, he couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He tossed and turned on the bed for a long time and baked pancakes. Then he simply jumped up and lit the oil lamp, planning to organize the things he would need to learn magic tomorrow. This cabin is Greet's own home and the only real estate left to him by his original father. The house is not big, with only one room in total, about 20 square meters. Greet looked around, and with the faint light of the oil lamp, he could see the bottom at a glance. Although the area is small, the quality of the house is actually good. The windows are made of wooden shutters. Over time, there are many gaps. A slight cool breeze blew through the cracks in the window and hit her body, making Gretel shiver. The furniture in the house is all there should be. There is a double bed, a wardrobe, and a wash basin on a cabinet beside the bed. The square table by the window was probably used for eating, and there were 2 chairs, one horizontal and one vertical. One of them had a broken leg and could only lean against the wall with 2 bricks underneath to barely maintain balance. There was a wooden frame against the wall on the other side of the room, with a set of leather armor hanging on it. It was quite exquisite and inlaid with many copper pieces. There was a big sword standing next to the leather armor. Gretel went over and weighed it, but he couldn't lift it at all. It should be the weapon used by the original owner's father. Leaning over and looking down, I saw a wooden box stuffed under the bed against the wall. It was the box of books left by the original owner's father. You definitely don't need to take the book to the Mage Tower. Greet thought for a while, then dragged out the book box and dug out a quill with half of its feathers broken off, and a small bottle of ink that was about to dry up. He moved a few more books away, pulled out a small roll of rough hemp paper, spread it out and looked at it. There were only 5 or 6 sheets. Is this the precursor to learning to read, learning to write, and using all that is left? If you are not allowed to copy and can only take notes, these pens and paper will be enough for the first day, barely enough. Greet let out a big sigh. He put the pen and paper in his backpack, pushed the book box back to the bottom of the bed, blew out the oil lamp, and lay down on the bed with his limbs spread out. Drowsiness enveloped him almost immediately. In the darkness, Greet thought half asleep. Oh, I have become a homeowner. In his previous life, he was not married and his salary was low. He saw his salary increasing linearly and housing prices increasing exponentially, so he decided to buy a house very late. After paying the down payment and paying off the loan for half a year, I haven't received the key yet, so I traveled through time. It couldn't be more tragic. Fortunately, there is a house after traveling through time. No matter how old or small it is still a house. It is still a brick and wood structure, much better than the dilapidated wooden house I saw yesterday. Your residence has surpassed 85% of the residential houses in the city, please continue to maintain it. If he had brought a system with him when he traveled through time, he would probably have given such a prompt at this moment, right? It was a sound sleep. It wasn't until the loud crow of roosters broke through the morning light that Greet opened his eyes and sat up from the bed suddenly. Mage apprentice. I'm going to learn magic. Oops, I'm still so sleepy. I had an all-night operation at the necromancers yesterday, and rushed back to the city in the morning to study at the magic tower. Then he returned to the military camp, rescuing people, giving lectures, and going to the temple of the spring goddess. This intensity was comparable to the overtime work in his previous life. Forget it, wash your face more with cold water. Greet jumped out of bed, hummed a song and started washing. There is no such thing as a bathroom in the hut, and the wash basin at home is also empty. Greet tried hard to search his memory, and then remembered that the well was half a street away. He went out to solve a personal problem and came back with a bucket of water. Wash your face and brush your teeth, clean yourself up and down, open the closet and take out the only 2 shirts you have, and compare them back and forth. Both shirts are long-sleeved, one dark and one light. The light-colored one was already too small, and it was so tight on my body that I couldn't even bend my elbows. The dark one is the right size, but there are several patches on the elbows and cuffs. Gretel took one piece with his left hand and another with his right hand, hesitating. The rest of the wardrobe is just a waistcoat. Think about it, when I went to the magic tower yesterday, Master Herman was wearing a robe, and Elliot, who was blown out, was also wearing a robe. Even the servant who answered the door was wearing a shirt and vest. After all, you are going to study, and it is visible to the naked eye that it is the lowest level of the magic tower, so you should try to dress more solemnly. There are already enough difficulties, there is no need to create additional difficulties. So, which one to wear? He competed with each other, but finally gritted his teeth and put on the old dark clothes. Just as I was about to put on my shoes, someone was already knocking on the door outside the hut. Little Gretel, little Gretel. Here I come, Aunt Eileen. Gretel jumped up and shouted back. He didn't bother to put on his shoes and jumped over to open the door with bare feet. As soon as the door opened, and Eileen's thin palm slapped on his shoulder. Little Gretel, aren't you going to the magic tower today? Why are you dressed like this? Come on, put on this dress. This is a new dress made by your brother Raymond. It's not upper body yet, and Auntie changed it for you. Breakfast have you eaten? Auntie also prepared lunch for you, remember to take it with you. And Eileen. Gretel blurted out. A warm current surged in his chest. His chest rose and fell twice, and finally he whispered. And, this is what Brother Raymond will wear for Midsummer Festival. Don't worry about that kid. And Eileen pushed the clothes into his hands. Without any explanation, she pushed him around in a circle, slapped him hard again, and urged him to change clothes. That boy, even if he wears good clothes, he won't be able to find a girlfriend on Midsummer Day. Put it on, little Gretel, you go to learn magic, of course you must wear something good. After the slap, Gretel was unable to avoid it, and his shoulders immediately went numb. Gretel's face turned bitter, and she screamed in reflex. Ouch! This unscientific. This body is from a first-level warrior after all. Facts have proven that even if a legendary warrior is slapped by the ant who watched him grow up, his hit rate is 100%. Gretel was photographed swaying around, so he had to hide in a corner and quickly put on new clothes. And Eileen pulled him to look left and right, and the more he looked, the more satisfied he became. Oh, little Gretel, you still look good in these clothes. Auntie has always seen you as a promising person since you were a child. Greet held her hand back. The tentacles are rough, the fingertips are pitted, and if you look closely, there are some blood stains. It is obvious that I worked all night last night and pricked my fingers more than once. Gretel sighed softly, folded her rough and warm hands into her palms, and closed her eyes. Health depends on life, life depends on it. He chanted silently. Between the palms, a thin white light gently lit up, smearing along the woman's fingertips, palms, and wrists. Wherever it went, cracks healed and stab wounds healed. On those hands that were soaked, beaten, and washed in cold water every day, a warm current dissipated the faint coldness in the bones. Little Gretel, don't. The woman's voice trembled slightly. Gretel opened her eyes, looked down at her hands that were soft and smooth again, and smiled sincerely. And Eileen, thank you for your hard work. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 38. Gretel's journey as a mage began in peace. The strife, slaps in the face, the oppression of common people by noble children, that I had seen in the online articles in my previous life were nothing. Gretel walked from Heartland City to the Mage Tower. Along the way, he imagined countless common plots in his mind, but unfortunately none of them happened. It's not that all the students have high moral standards and follow the 24-character mantra, but, there is no one. Master Herman was nowhere to be seen. The wizard Elliot, who was blown out of the wizard tower last time, could not see anyone either. It was so quiet outside the mage tower that you could hear the chirping of birds. Gretel guessed that the experiment was probably going well, or that the person was doing another experiment and it would not explode for the time being. Several other low-level mages, or mage apprentices, when Master Herman came yesterday, he said disciples, there should be more than one, were nowhere to be seen. Considering that yesterday's explosion occurred on the 4th floor, and Master Herman only allowed him to read the books on the 1st floor, Greet had reason to believe that there was a library dedicated to mages and wizard apprentices upstairs. These extraordinary people who have stepped into the magic door are all active on the 2nd floor and above. They will never go downstairs unless necessary. As for teaching, I can only say that today is not the day for classes to start. The library on the 1st floor of the Mage Tower was empty except for Gretel. The servant guarding the gate of the Master's Tower led him to the library, said, "You are not allowed to go upstairs, and turned away. Gretel wanted to ask him where the bathroom was, but before he could ask, he had disappeared without a trace. Not even a pot of water. Hey, in the past, the school library and library did not provide drinking water, so I got used to it. Gretel put down his backpack. Go to the bookshelf. When he stepped into the library, he saw these bookshelves at first sight. The fine dark maroon wooden shelves stood tall and tall. There are also exquisite patterns carved on the capitals of the pillars and the top of the bookshelf. Just looking at this decoration makes people feel that the books on them are valuable. Just this bookshelf is enough for my salary for a year, right? Gretel secretly speculated and quickly scanned the books on the shelf. There are not many books in the library, there are only 2 bookshelves in total. The books on the shelf were thick and large, as long as his elbow to his fingertips, and almost as thick as a punch. In order to accommodate such a large book, the bookshelf is divided into only 4 levels from top to bottom. The shelves in each layer were clearly made of solid wood, with a thickness of more than 5 centimeters. The middle section of the shelf was still bent due to pressure. Because the books are so big, the 2 bookshelves combined cannot contain more than 100 books. Gretel did a quick mental calculation. Not bad, compared to their 7-year joint undergraduate and master's degree textbooks, in terms of quantity alone, it's about the same, haha. After all, the medical textbooks were called Blue Love of Life and Death by the later students. There were 53 books in total, plus political courses, public basic courses, and some optional elective courses. The textbooks alone were close to 100. What's more, in addition to textbooks, medicine also has a lot of exercise books, reference literature, clinical diagnosis and treatment guides, and other materials, all of which need to be memorized. We are professionals in learning. Not afraid. Gretel encouraged himself secretly. So, the next step is to pick out the books you need to read. Those book titles reported by Master Herman. Spell basics. Magic pattern structure. First interpretation of elements. Potions. And the most basic, magic words. As for the rest of the books on the bookshelf, they may not be unimportant, but let's start with the basics. Greet tilted his head and looked at the words on the spine of the book. He found that he couldn't see the meaning, so he tilted his head to the left. I still couldn't tell what the word was, or even whether it was written vertically or horizontally, or whether it was upside down to the left or right. I had no choice but to tilt my head to the right. After going back and forth and doing several cervical spine exercises, Greet finally accepted a cruel reality. He recognized none of the words on the spine. There is no other way, just read the text. He stood on tiptoe and picked up a book from the shelf. As soon as I picked it up, my arm sank down, and I had to put in more force to hold it steady. So heavy. Being a librarian these days is a physical job, right? Gretel was speechless. He carefully brought the book to the table, put it down, straightened it, and studied the cover carefully. The dark blue leather book cover feels thick and soft, with silver squiggles coiled around it, twisting and turning like vines. Gretel recognized it for a moment, but couldn't figure it out and could only open the title page. Don't recognize it? Still don't recognize it? Even after turning to the text, I still don't know what this book is about, and I don't even understand the words above. The only advantage is that this big book is a handwritten copy, and the characters are more than 10 times larger than later printings. As you can imagine, the content of the entire book is at most 1/10. No, not even a tenth. The paper under my hand is several times thicker than in the previous life. It is thick and yellow, and clear traces of fibers can be seen. The paper is thicker, and the number of pages is naturally reduced. It is not surprising that the information recorded on it is also reduced. Gretel heaved a sigh of relief, but after thinking about it, his heart tightened again. The paper-making technology of this era was still quite crude, and indeed it could only record common knowledge. It is conceivable that in the future, if you want to copy spells or something, the starting price of paper, parchment, Warcraft skin, etc. will be several times more expensive than this paper. If the material is too poor, the magic power cannot be carried at all, and there is a high probability that it will be burned after writing. In the future, he will have to come up with the materials to copy spells. You have to buy your own paper, pen, and ink. I have to look at the prices later. Well, I feel so poor. Greed sighed, closed the cover of the book with tears in her eyes, took it back to the bookshelf, and went to carry the second book. The second book. Don't recognize it. The third book. Don't recognize it. Book 10. Don't recognize. There was already a thin layer of sweat on the body, half from tiredness and half from anxiety. I came early, and I wasn't hungry yet, but my muscles and bones were exhausted, my body was exhausted, and my actions were chaotic. I have tasted all these tastes. No wonder librarianship is a hidden profession. In this line of work, great achievements are indeed achieved. He wiped his sweat and continued to move books. The title of the 17th book is finally written in common language, called The Miracle Journey of the Archmage. Greed had an ominous premonition after reading the title of the book. He opened it and read 2 lines. It turned out to be a novel. It's still a bad adventure novel. If you put it at the starting point, you can't even sign a contract. So I worked hard and worked up a sweat. How many of the things I was carrying must be novels? Oh no. Gretel beat his chest. The bad news is that he will have to fight with these novels for who knows how long. The good news is that he needs to read, memorize, less textbooks. You can't do this. Suddenly a voice sounded from behind. Gretel's hand holding the book froze. Thanks to @screws for the 100 starting coins, please also vote for this book if you vote for recommendation. It's a new week, and the new book list of signed works has begun again. Please support me. Please collect it. Please recommend. Please review the book. Asking for all kinds of things. Hey, bow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 39. Who is talking behind my back? Gretel didn't dare to look back, fearing that he would lose the money if he dropped the book in his hand. He used his hands to firmly push the book back onto the shelf, then turned around and looked back. Looking at the door, who is this? The person who came was a young man, about 20 years old, with flaxen hair and wearing a black mage robe. Seeing Greed turn around, he grinned happily, his white teeth shining brightly. Hey, little guy. Master Mage Gretel bowed his head and saluted, feeling confused. Who is this familiar guy? When he lowered his head, he saw the person leaning on the doorframe, tapping his right foot weakly on the ground, as if he didn't dare to use force. Greed suddenly realized, no wonder he couldn't recognize him. That guy flew out of the mage tower yesterday, and his whole face was blackened. The only thing that looked familiar to Gretel was his big white teeth. Mr. Elliot. Is your foot okay yet? How can it be so fast? The visitor had a bitter look on his face and tiptoed to the table to sit down. It was obvious that he had been twisted badly yesterday. Greed stepped forward to take a look and asked curiously, "Don't you have any treatment?" "You're kidding. Healing potions are so expensive," Elliot yelled. After he finished shouting, he seemed to remember that he shouldn't be so embarrassed in front of newcomers, so he smiled coquettishly. Gretel had turned around the long table and came to him. "Can you let me see it? Oh, by the way, you're a healer. Look." Gretel knelt down at his feet. Observing carefully, I saw that the outside of his right ankle was swollen like a steamed bun, but the inside was fine, and the instep was also highly swollen. Greet held the opponent's ankle with his left hand, placed his right thumb on the lateral ligament, and pressed hard. Ouch! Elliot screamed and struggled back. He tapped the ground with his right foot, jumped with his left foot, and ran away quickly. Aren't you a healer? Here's the healing technique. I'm a healer and that's why I need to check, Greet yelled back. While yelling, he stared at Elliot's right foot without raising his head. I can still use a little force, which is good. It seems to be a high probability no broken bones. As for the ligament, it hurt like this when I pressed my finger just now. The lateral collateral ligament should be torn. Bring your feet back. Elliot tried to run away. Unfortunately, I couldn't run fast with one leg lame. I wanted to cast a spell, but the pain kept distracting me from my concentration. Greet rushed forward to catch him, squatted down and pressed on the outside of the ankle bone of his right foot one by one, then held the sole of the foot and rotated it inward and outward. Does it hurt here? What about here? How about turning like this? Ouch, it's okay here, it's okay, ouch. It hurts, it hurts. Let go. Very good. Pressure in the plantar flexion position of the ankle joint will cause obvious pain when the foot turns inward. There are localized tenderness points in the injured area. It can be judged that the anterior talofibular ligament is the most severely strained, the posterior talofibular ligament is okay, and the calcaneofibular ligament is basically no big problem. The rest is soft tissue contusion and edema. Gretel calmed down and traced the anatomy of the foot in his mind, and his fingertips slowly lit up with white light. Repair damaged ligaments, accelerate local tissue metabolism, quickly absorb edema, and heal injured soft tissues. The swelling in my right ankle gradually subsided. Elliot breathed a sigh of relief. Ah, it doesn't hurt anymore. He immediately wanted to withdraw his right foot. Greet grabbed it. Wait. Let me check again. Press, spin, and even make your opponent jump. After a set of procedures, Greet finally confirmed that the ankle sprain had been treated. He breathed a sigh of relief and stood up from the ground, holding onto the chair. Elliot had already jumped over enthusiastically, grabbed his palm, and shook it vigorously. Oh! Thank you so much. His attitude changed drastically. We are no longer condescending and pointing fingers when we first came in. We are treated as equals. Greet agreed humbly, her mind racing. According to the rules of the mage world, no knowledge is free. Well, healing skills are obviously not free. The other party obviously feels that the healing potion is too expensive, so it is best for him to ask for a price that is very important to him, and the other party is a simple effort. Mr. Elliot, you just said that it's not okay for me to do this. Elliot slapped his head loudly. After going through the examination and treatment just now, he forgot what he was doing here. He pointed to the bookshelf. I said you can't do this. Reading through each book one after another without any purpose at all. You are just wasting your time. I remember you said yesterday that you haven't even learned magic words. Yes, Mr. Elliot. Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God, the savior finally came and he didn't have to waste his energy on novels. God knows, that novel is so heavy that the spine is covered with copper. He sincerely asked for advice. It is true that I have not received basic magic education. Mr. Elliot, could you please give me some advice on the order in which I should read these books? The order of study of any subject or professional course is very important. Just like when he studied medicine in his previous life, he first learned departmental interpretation and then regional interpretation. He first learned histology, embryology, and physiology, then pathology and pathophysiology. After these basics have been laid down, you can then learn about bureau analysis and diagnosis, then surgery, internal medicine, gynecology, pediatrics, infections, skin, neurology, and other disciplines of all sizes. After learning everything, go to the hospital and rotate through various departments. If you fail to learn the previous ones well, trying to learn the later ones is equivalent to building a tower on sand. It doesn't need to be blown by wind and waves, it will collapse after a little time. What about magic? The power of this thing belongs to itself. I didn't figure out the order. I just grabbed a book and started reading it. Do you want to die? Greed had originally thought about digging out all the books he recognized and finding a magic apprentice, preferably a magician, to ask him which book to read first and which one to read last. Before he could think of any way to block people, Master Elliot came to the door himself. Great. Reading order. Elliot's eyes lit up. Healing potions are expensive, and healing spells are certainly not free. But giving money directly seemed too rude. The order in which the other party asked for advice and reading was just right, just right. He chanted silently and waved his right hand. With the roar of the wind, all the books flew out of the bookshelf, suspended in the air, and formed several semicircles around Elliot. Elliot looked around and tapped his fingers. You. Whisking, a dozen books flew onto the table in one breath, forming a pile. Elliot waved his hand again, and the rest of the books scattered into categories and flew back to the bookshelves in rows. Quietly arranged neatly, as if they had never been touched. Elliot pointed at the table. You just need to read these books first. Well, magical letters and basic meditation, read these two books first. Magic patterns, spells, elements and potions are not in any order. If you are tired of reading, History of Magic, Preliminary Alchemy and Warcraft Illustrated can be used as entertainment. Gretel's magic learning career has finally begun. Although, it doesn't look like it went well. Please encourage him more. Please collect, recommend, and review books. Please give me all kinds of information. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 40. A dozen books. You have to see it all, or rather, memorize it all. Master Elliot, who felt that he had returned the favor, said goodbye and left. Greed stood in front of the table, looking at the thick stack of textbooks in front of him, and breathed a sigh of relief. He stretched out his hand and measured it, about 10 books, larger than the 16-carat volume in his previous life, stretching from the solid oak tabletop to his neck. The person leaned forward, lowered his head, and placed his chin flat on the book. Is this thickness? Just, little things. Which medical students' textbooks, exercise books, atlases, etc. are not stacked high enough for one person? Greed followed Master Elliot's instructions and flipped through the pile of books. In the first book, I don't know the characters. In the second book, I don't know the characters. In the third book, I still don't know the characters. Fall. Are they all written in magic words? Co-author, in order to learn magic, I have to learn a language first, right? And it's still mute. Holding a glimmer of hope, Greed flipped through the first book to the last one, and found that except for magical philology, all other basic textbooks and magic principles were written in words he didn't recognize. He had no choice but to put those. He piled the books back on the shelf, opened the last book, and began to fight with the magic words desperately. There are 4,500 vocabulary words for level 4. I memorized it in 1 month that year. There are 5,500 vocabulary words for level 6. I forgot how long it took to memorize it. Anyway, it seems quite easy to pass set -6 if you try to find every opportunity to memorize it under the heavy pressure of professional courses. Magic words. How many words are there in this dictionary? Greed had not counted, nor did he want to. The only thing he could be sure of was that this book, Magical Philology, was the thickest among the nearly 100 books on the bookshelf. Other books were at most 1 fist thick, but he was 2 fists thick. The characters are also written in small sizes. If the characters in other books are number 1, or 1 circle larger than the number 1, the characters in this book are only size 2. The volume of this content is almost as big as that of Sci-fi. Gretel whined silently. He gritted his teeth and opened the first page, and then he felt another slap on his forehead. The arrangement of this book is very random, and it is completely arranged according to what comes to mind, or according to the importance considered by the author. At the beginning of the first page, the 4 elements are listed in order: fire, water, wind, and earth. Turn another page. Magic, dragon, spirit, UN dynasty, Mars, Venus, Sun, Saturn. The third page. Macrocosm, microcosm, birth, death, sages, devils. Greed. I want a dictionary. I want all words in alphabetical order. At least give me the alphabet first. English's 26-letter alphabet, Japanese syllabary, German's 30-syllable alphabet, and the International Phonetic Alphabet. Please come back, I will never despise you for being too basic. But no one responded to him. There is no dictionary, no phonetic symbols, no one releases language proficiency that allows him to instantly learn magic words, and there is no intelligent brain to scan all the information and engrave unfamiliar language words into the database. After Gretel finished crying and wiping away her tears, she could only take out the pen from her backpack, spread out the paper, and began to rely on herself and work hard. First, count all the letters that appear. It took about half an hour to flip through 30 or 50 pages of the book in hand, and the boss was painted on the paper. Confirming that no new letters would appear, Gretel took a deep breath and began to sort them. Fortunately, the appearance of this magical text is somewhat similar to Latin. Greed purely looked at faces. Those who looked like A were placed first, those who looked like B were placed second. Those who did not look like English letters were placed in German letters and Roman letters in order. What? This letter looks really special and doesn't look like anyone else. Always throw it to the end. After this round of work, I discovered that the characters I wanted to learn were not too complicated. There were about 60 letters. Considering that some of them only appeared at the beginning of words, we can roughly infer that there are upper and lower cases, that is, the total number of letters. About 30. Gretel turned over the manuscript paper in his hand and wrote a new letter every other paragraph. Then, looking at the magic letters spread out in front of him, he became angry and rubbed his wrists. This entire book needs to be reorganized. It's not easy. Compiling a dictionary is really not easy, no wonder Dictionary Publishing House revises dictionaries once every 10 years. Just revising this book can feed half of the people in the society. Really, the workload is just that big. And now all this workload is his alone. Forget it, I used to read online articles, and some seniors even used code-breaking methods to decipher the magic language themselves. Comparatively speaking, he is relatively happy because he has ready-made books to copy. Greed went page by page, copying the words in Magical Philology and their corresponding common language definitions under the corresponding initial letters. Not to mention, copying is quite useful for deepening memory. At least after copying one page, Greed found that he had memorized the page he had copied. Greed worked hard for a long time, his eyes were blurred and his wrists were sore from copying, and he suspected that he was about to suffer from tenosynovitis. When he really wanted to put a healing spell on his wrist to comfort him, Greed found that he encountered the first difficulty. We've run out of paper. There were 5 or 6 pieces of paper I brought, and they were densely written on both sides. Then, there was no room to write. Tear a blank page from which book? Greed felt that he could not do such a thing. Looking for someone to borrow paper? Don't dare. Master Herman said that copying is prohibited, and if he goes to ask someone to borrow it now, wouldn't he be hitting the muzzle of the gun himself? Looking for help and interceding with Master Gearman? Greet felt that he had not lived enough and did not want to be blasted into black coal by the fireball. He thought quickly for a moment, stuffed the paper, pen, and ink into his backpack, put it on his back and left. I can still read the reference book tomorrow. If I don't go back to the city, the store will be closed and there will be nowhere to buy paper. He ran back to the city and rushed into his home. After closing the door, he moved to the side of the square table, moved the chair with the broken leg, moved away the bricks that supported the chair legs, and dug a few shovels underneath. There was a small money bag lying neatly in the dirt. Greet took it out and poured it out. A small pile of coins fell out with a jingle in his hand. 2 silver coins, 7 copper coins. At the other end of the long street, Uncle Simon's bakery sells black bread for a copper coin. Save it and eat it all day. 1 silver coin can be exchanged for 10 copper coins. This small bag of money is enough for the original person for a month. His salary in the city guard was 5 silver coins a month. If you are patrolling in the city, you can go to the military camp for a meal. After all, I can save 2 silver coins a month to meet other daily expenses. But if you want to buy paper, this amount of money is probably not enough. The productivity level of this other world is not much better than that of the Middle Ages. In my impression, in this era, paper and pen are extremely expensive. Gretel hesitated for a moment, climbed under the bed, pushed open the book box, and dug out a small box from the bottom. Thanks to salt and pepper taro for the 100 starting coins. The collection has been growing very slowly recently. I will work harder and make the content more interesting.